So I wanted to give people a little background for you, where your background has been as a minister of the gospel. So, just kind of rehash a little bit. I know your story, but just tell us again your background and what you do in ministry.
Yeah, so I've been working in missions now since 2008, 2009-ish, and with Equipping Pastors International. It's a missions organization that was actually founded in Orlando, Florida, from our church, Covenant Presbyterian Church. And we have missionaries that go all around the world, primarily like Africa, India, and train and equip pastors and Christian leaders to do the work of the ministry. In other words, train them to do evangelism, train them to do discipleship, and train them to do missions in their own regions. And so we've been doing that for about 10 years now. My emphasis has been in the Middle East and North Africa, and where Islam is fully entrenched. And basically, what I always say, my purpose is to recover the lost history of Christianity. These were Christian nations at one time. They were Christian nations for nearly 800 years before the birth of Muhammad. Mm-hmm. And they were not just Christian nations, but they were the intellectual and theological capitals of the Christian world. Mm-hmm. This was the place where Christianity was birthed, it was formed, and it thrived. And they were literally the intellectual capital of the Christian world. And this is where our theology was made. The great, like for instance in the Council of Nicaea, there were 15 Egyptian bishops there. They were called the pharaohs of the church.
Right.
So this is a powerhouse. These were the players. And the Middle East, North Africa, this was where the great thinking was done, the great writing was done. Some places, the great Latin theologians were from North Africa, the great Greek theologians, were from Alexandria and, modern day Turkey. So it was just a hotbed for Christianity. Mm-hmm. And I want to see that recovered, which means that we not only have to train pastors and Christian leaders, and this is over my qualifications and out of my depth, but, mm-hmm. That the continuation of that, we have to retrain new scholars, mm-hmm. To do research and so forth, and excavation, and in the original languages, and uncover this rich tapestry of Christian heritage.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Muhammad. He consulted a Christian priest, right, when he first had some of his visions. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, most likely he was in contact with a group of Christians that we'd probably label as heretics. They were Nestorians. And this is why he has a deformed view of monotheism and Trinitarianism and so forth, is because they had a deformed view of Trinitarianism. And that was communicated to him, and that's why Islam, is so anti-Trinitarian, and is really a
what was the error there in their understanding of Jesus, Christologically speaking? Was there too much emphasis on the like a Gnostic thing, or is that the wrong way?
Well, that whole area is full of all kinds of heresies, obviously. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of Gnosticism as well in that area. Mm-hmm. But in North Africa, and especially out of Egypt, a lot of Gnostic things. So the heresies were more Christological and theological in terms of understanding, whether or not Jesus was divine, fully God and fully human. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So would you say that Islam is a Christian heresy, or is that too?
Well, I think it borders on that. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's a complete misrepresentation of Islam. Mm-hmm. I think there's been some research along those lines. I think in its original state, that might be more apt than what the fully developed Islam is at this point. You know, but in its original state, I would say that was probably an apt description.
So its roots.
Yeah.
So you told me once that you find yourself sometimes more at home. You were in Orlando, and you said, I find myself more at home in the streets of Cairo, Egypt sometimes.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, you know, again, you know, you're walking, you know, in a place where Jesus was. You know, this is probably where Jesus spent the first 5 to 7 years of his life, which are the formative years. You know, I always like to tell Egyptians and remind them that, as well as Christians, you know, that Jesus probably thought of himself as an Egyptian at first. His self-identity, you know, he grew up around Egyptians. He played with Egyptians, and there's a lot of biblical history that unfolds in Egypt. I mean, you know, Abraham, the patriarchs, you know, were in Egypt. Moses, Aaron, Jeremiah went back to Egypt. You know, so you know, the Exodus comes out of Egypt. So I mean, Egypt is mentioned more times. There's only one nation that's mentioned more times than Egypt in the Bible, and that's Israel. Number 2 is Egypt. You know, and when you think about that, you can't, you can't find America in the Bible. You can't find Western Europe in the Bible. You know, but you can find Egypt. You know, and so there's this rich heritage, this rich history that all unfolded in Egypt, and then God promises to, you know, in Isaiah 19, he says, "Blessed be Egypt, my people." You know, and in that day, you know, God says He's going to build a highway from Egypt to Syria to Israel. You know, and you know, and He says, you know, "Blessed be Egypt, my people." And that's powerful. And you know, of course, Syria is northern Iraq. That's modern day northern Iraq. And so, you know, this whole area, you know, it's where I feel most alive. It's where I feel, you know, like I belong. You know, I don't always feel like I belong here, you know, but I feel like I belong there.
There's a Muslim Uber driver that told me once recently in a car ride, he said, he was very smart, friendly, nice guy, wonderful guy, but he was talking about Christianity. He said, the Christianity is kind of like, it's good, but it's like having if you have iPhone, you don't want to stick with iPhone 5. You want to have the latest edition. It lets you see God, but it's not quite as crystal clear. You know, the updates and the software is not as crisp and full of power. You know, and that's the way and I thought that's interesting. I think, do you find that as a similar view from Muslims that you've interacted with in the Middle East about Christianity?
Well, I find that argument akin to, you know, the communist dialectic. You know, why does it stop there? If that's true, why does it stop there?
Right.
You know, Khrushchev, when he was in America, you know, back in the 1950s, and you know, this is, you know, the communism is based on, you know, a Hegelian theory of, you know, the Hegelian dialectic is dialectical materialism,
right.
You know, which sees history, you know, play out in this thesis and antithesis and synthesis, you know, and so, you know, capitalism and communism are antithesis, and you know, so the question is, why does it stop with communism, right? You know,
right.
Well, if what this man is saying about Islam, you know, the newest, the latest, you know, then, well, if that's true, then why does it stop with Islam?
Right.
Shouldn't we be waiting for the next,
Right.
you know, great thing, great new thing, or whatever?
Yeah.
So I think it's a false dialectic, and you know, I mean, the Bible certainly presents, and of course, the place they go, you know, is, you know, for that dialectic is John 14 through 16. You know, when the Paraclete comes, and you know, Christians would read that the Helper, the Counselor, you know, is the Holy Spirit. Islam reads that as Muhammad, You know, when the Paraclete comes, you know, that to them that's Muhammad. Muhammad is the prophet that Jesus says is going to come when he goes. And but Jesus is clear. The New Testament is clear that Jesus is the final prophet. You know, he's the fulfillment of all the prophets, and he's the final prophet. In fact, he's the final prophet, priest, and king.
Yeah, that word paraclete, I believe, means defender, right?
Right.
It's defense attorney.
Exactly.
And Satan, in that word, that root means the accuser.
Exactly.
Right? So you have the accuser.
Yeah.
You got your special prosecutor,
Right.
right?
Right.
And then you've got your defender, your defense attorney.
Right.
So that's the juxtaposition between those two forces within humanity, right?
Correct.
And so I want to look at these topics, you know, and especially Christianity's impact from an anthropological level, which is simply the study of humanity, the study of man and how we came to be who we are in relationship to ourselves and to our communities and that history. And so I think what's interesting about that is that you can look at these terms. The Bible is not just the study of God, that's theology, but it's also the study of man. So it should give you the full rendering, or at least the full scope of what it means to be human, as well as what God's like. And so everything has kind of a layer to it where you can learn about God's character, the nature of God, and that unknown thing. And then you can also see something that's more unknown than we'd like to recognize, which is our own humanity. And what does it mean to be human? And even in Jesus, you see that too, that the doctrine is that he's Son of God and Son of Man. So if you only have a theology of Jesus, then you'll only have a disembodied Jesus. You have to have a Son of Man theology that accompanies, right? That's where you get your anthropology. So if he's the Son of Man, then he should, if I study the story of Jesus, it should reveal to me the full scope of anthropology of where we came from and where we're going. And that's interesting to me. And I think it's an area of the Bible that has been neglected, to say the least, by Christian circles, right? Even though it's still functioning on us and it's moving us, because if the Bible has a science of man to it, and cultures that have been baked in that tradition of studying the Bible and using their art and everything to reflect what they learn from the Bible, then that science of man will have an effect on a culture the longer it steeps in, you know?
Yeah, I think, our investigation of the Bible and the truths that it's telling is often been, isolated on one or the other of those two things.
Right.
And I think, really there should be three perspectives that are always in play. One is God, the other is ourselves, and then the world.
Right.
So you always have those three perspectives. And when we bring, only one of those perspectives to our investigation of the Bible, we lose the other 2/3 that the Bible is trying to teach us.
Right.
And not only that, but those two things, and each one informs the other.
Right.
And together, right, that keeps us from being what the scholastics used to say in the Middle Ages, from being just merely human to being, fully human.
Right, right. And only, and the Christian tradition would say only God has been fully human.
Yeah.
We're not, right?
Right. Yeah.
We're not fully human.
Right.
So we always think about trying to catch up to Jesus in this deity, like, so I could never catch up, but we can't catch up on how human he is either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
So, someone who's been a big influence on me in understanding the anthropology of the Bible is Rene Girard, and you as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So maybe you take a crack at giving people, how would you explain Rene Girard and why it matters to look into him if you're meeting someone?
Well, yeah.
How do you start with that? It's hard to.
Yeah. It's probably a conversational killer, when
Right.
you're just sitting with your neighbor or whatever. But I find that he's useful in a lot of ways for understanding a lot of things in history and culture and in life.
Right.
You were the one that first turned me on to Rene Girard, so I'm grateful for that. And you've also really imbibed his anthropology, his philosophy, and are able to manipulate it and use it in ways that I think are very helpful for the audiences that you're trying to reach. But if I think the starting place with Rene Girard is understanding that human beings are fundamentally desiring creatures. Now, that's not radically different than, say, what a Buddhist would say on its face. Right. So for the Buddhist, desire is the great evil. It's what's wrong with humanity. That is the human problem, the human predicament. And so the goal for a Buddhist is to extinguish desire, to get rid of it. But that's not at all what Girard is saying. So the starting place for him is the 10th commandment in the Bible. Of the 10 commandments, the 10th is the most important. It's also the longest. And not only that, but it's the key to understanding all the rest of the commandments.
Yeah, thou shalt not covet.
Right. Yeah.
But the emphasis is on the neighbor there. Not,
yeah.
It says thou shalt not covet this, that, or anything else that belongs to your
And
neighbor.
notice how it expands, right? You shouldn't covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's donkey, right? And then it just adds the catch-all, the kitchen sink, right? Or anything else, And so it just throws in the whole kitchen sink. And then, of course, Paul later on, when he's talking about what a great Jew he was and a great Israelite, and how he kept the law in all matters blameless, except for one thing, when the law said, "Thou shalt not covet." It slayed me, and so Girard puts his finger on that and says, "This is the human predicament. This is the human problem. It's basically this," and this is where I think where Girard is sort of universal, because everybody can identify with this, right? We want what our neighbor has. More than that, we want what we think our neighbor wants. And then the thing about the desire that's, the one thing about desire that Girard brings out that I don't think anyone else brought out prior to him was that most Christians, when we think of desire, we think of it as something internal to us, right? Desire comes from within, okay? And in that way, I think we're more Buddhist than we are Christian. Because we think desire is something that comes from within.
Right.
But Girard uses the 10th commandment to say, no, desire is something external to us.
Right.
And then what? And we model, we imitate. This is what he means by mimetic, right? We model, we imitate the people who have what we want or who what we think they want. And so we begin to pattern our lives and model our lives. That starts out innocently. Children imitate their parents. You want to be like somebody who's respectable and so forth. So it starts out as something innocent and even admirable. But then Girard talks about this cycle, of mimetic desire that starts out, with admiration, right? But then it turns into rivalry, and the rivalry becomes conflict. Conflict becomes scandal, and then scandal leads to violence.
Right. And he started off with this by just looking at the great novels of Western literature, and he was wanting to know what made them great. Why did they speak so profoundly to the human condition? And he found that these great novelists and these authors, and then he also into like Shakespeare and people like that they had a common pattern, right, in all these great novels. And that there was a growth pattern also that he saw in their earlier works when they're more immature, and then later on as they develop and kind of slay their ego through the process of growing up.
Yeah, so, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but that's kind of what that running theme was that he found in his early work.
Right.
I believe it was Johns Hopkins University or Indiana University. He was different ones he went to. But it was different from the mode of his time and our time, which is all about deconstructing. There is no meaning in the text. He saw a unifying pattern of great texts throughout everything, which is a very Christian presupposition already coming, right? That there's logos, there's some kind of logic that is undergirding what we're doing. But, what were you saying?
Yeah, I think that's right, and so you know, his literary analysis there is profound, and I think it turned the whole literary world on its head. You know, but it also helped us in doing our biblical theology. But you know, I think one of the things that Girard is doing is he's put to death, if you will, once and for all, the idea of the monomyth. Right? That all myths are essentially telling the same story, and that the Bible is just another form of that myth, you know, that's relevant to its own culture, you know. But all myths and all symbols are all pointing to the same story, you know, we call it the monomyth. You know, there's just one myth.
Like Joseph Campbell. And
Joseph Campbell is the godfather of the monomyth, you know, for the 20th century, you know.
Carl Jung.
Yeah. So, you know, and so these are all telling the same story, and they're all, you know, saying the same thing. They're using different language and, you know, and different symbols perhaps that are unique to their own cultures, but it's the same story. And Girard doesn't let them get away with it. He puts it to bed once and for all by destroying the monomyth. He says, no, Christianity is absolutely unique, because what the myth always does two things. The first thing that it does is it conceals the violence of the perpetrator. Right.
So it cartoonizes it almost.
Yes.
It abstracts it into symbols and metaphors, like Marduk. I mean, just using as an example, a Marduk god trips and he splits his head, and out comes a new creation. That's where humans came from, or these kind of it takes away the tangible, touchable violence that Girard suggests is at the heart of those myths.
Right. So so they're protecting, you know, the perpetrators.
Concealing the violence.
Concealing the violence and protecting the perpetrators, you know. And what Girard says, what Christianity does, right, is it reveals the violence of the perpetrators and it protects the victims. And that makes it radically different.
And we see that with one of the first stories in the Bible, Cain and Abel, right? You have twins, and just as a backdrop, you got to remember that ancient communities, they didn't like twins. Twins were a harbinger of chaos because they were doubles. So to go back to that desire and rivalry, people in ancient communities, they understood intuitively the power of envy or covetousness. And they wanted to put that fire and control it. And so they create these taboos that preserve difference. This is your property. This is your property. Don't steal or we'll get you. You know, this is your wife. This is my, you know, don't do that. Don't steal food now, you know. And so you create these boundaries which are meant to prevent out of control, reciprocal mirror rivalry over objects of desire. They're all meant to contain the unleashed power of human passion in a desirous state. But you know, what Cain and Abel reveal is that, you know, at the beginning, you know, you have these twins, or not twins, but they're
close
brothers.
to twins, they're brothers,
and they're fighting over, and well, they don't fight, but there's a sense in which Cain is jealous of his brother being his sacrifice being acceptable, right? And it says he kills his brother, and on that act he founds the first city. Which is, there you go, right there in the text is an indication that cities are started through bloodshed. They're started through,
and most likely is, I think what Girard's trying to point out there is that these are collective. You know, like, you know, we always think of Cain and Abel as sort of an individualized murder. You know, these are just two individuals out in the field. Girard would argue that, Cain wasn't by himself in this.
Right,
you
right.
know. But, and I think the point of all this is that the founding of civilization, or what we call civilization, is not very flattering.
Right.
Right? He calls the murder of Abel by Cain the founding murder, the
Right.
creative murder.
Right.
And this is the murder from which civilization comes. After that, you see, what happens. We have tools, we have industry, we have music, we have
Right.
all these things.
And he plays on that word remembrance, right?
Yeah.
Remembering
Yeah.
the body back together that was torn piece to pieces for the community's needs. So let's back up just a little bit for scapegoating, just to explain that as rivalrous
Right.
desires get contagious. So we see this all the time. If you're in a lunchroom setting and you see two people brawling in high school, soon, before you know it, that little internal rivalry turns into a whole escalation of people throwing chairs and fighting, and it spreads. And you can even feel your heartbeat escalating and your aggression, adrenaline kicking in just by being in proximity to vicious violence right in front of you. It's pulling you in,
Yeah. It's contagious.
It's contagious.
Yeah.
And that's what we see in communities that are racked by drug war and things like that. We see contagious, reciprocal honor killings. You shot my friends, I got to shoot you back. I have to.
Right.
And that's what you see with Lamech. Remember in the early, he's like, what's the story?
7 times 7. Yeah.
I've got to kill 7 times 7 because
Cain was
So it starts with
revenged by
Cain.
7, then 7 times 7 for Lamech.
So that's the escalation of violence that humans are known to do as a species that other animals don't do. If you have a wolf battle, okay, and the beta wolf loses to the alpha wolf, he doesn't go and try to kill off the alpha wolf's families and their families and their friends. If he loses, he'll render his neck in a submissive posture, and the alpha male will typically try to avert killing him unless it's an accident and anger, or in the middle of a fight. But there's not a vindictive vengeance need to reciprocate and escalate with animals that you see with humans.
Yeah.
And so there has to be a way to contain that in order for us to exist as a species right now. And Girard, that's where he comes up with seeing the scapegoat mechanism, which underpins the foundations of community, which is this idea that as a conflict is brewing, bad blood is stirring in the community. And everybody's pointing fingers at everybody else. So there's a reciprocal motion of finger pointing. And eventually, it's really easy to kind of start pointing those fingers in reciprocity to one direction, right?
Yeah.
I think it was that guy that really stirred us up. I think really he was the key. And everyone says, yeah, I do too. And in the fever of the moment, it becomes almost a law of nature that person is guilty of the conflict. And that group think, that hive mind locks in. And we don't fully understand the power of human group thinking. For good or bad, but mostly oftentimes for bad.
Yeah.
To be able to blind us to believe that this person, that's the witch that caused this. They put a spell on us, and that's why we're at each other's throats. Or whatever, they caused a famine. Or they broke a taboo with an animal or something that breaks difference. Remember those difference barriers that taboos are designed to do, or to contain contagious desire. And oftentimes we see gods having undifferentiation in their character. They're half horse, half human. Right? So they're breaking the boundaries of difference. Almost like they've been cartoonized and symbolized as representations of the violation of difference that they were accused of or in sometimes guilty of. Right?
Yeah.
And they must be killed. And in the killing of them, there is catharsis. There is relief. And that relief is what binds the community back together. A little bit of good violence is okay to prevent the bad violence.
Right. Yeah. Well, like Caiaphas said, it's necessary that one be sacrificed for the good of the community.
Yeah, it's better that one man die than the whole nation perish.
Yeah.
And that's at the heart. And that's why I think, where else but Scripture do you find that sentence so brazenly there?
Yeah. Right.
And that, I think, is still what's at the heart of what we're dealing with in politics today. I do think that Christianity has done, Jesus' movement in history has put a massive monkey wrench into the scapegoat mechanism working well. It doesn't work as well anymore. It's still grinding down, and it's working less and less, exponentially so, the more the world becomes infected with the awareness of the victim. Like going back to Cain and Abel, the awareness that God, or just take that word God out for a second, say the highest social good, the highest social principle of order says, where's your brother? Did you kill him? All other mythologies were written from the other narrative.
Right,
the highest social order is, we killed the monster.
Yeah,
the guy was named Abel. He's a monster.
Yeah,
He was half pig, half face, half human.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
But in the Bible, you have this
Yeah.
radical
Right.
story from below.
Yeah, where's your brother? Yeah.
Where's your brother?
Am I my brother's keeper?
Yeah. That's where it's the first murder mystery, right? Is the Bible,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's the killer? Why did you kill him? You know? That's the question that is radical in the context of ancient literature.
There's something embedded in that story too that I think is relevant for today, and by today I mean the day just following the weekend when we had 2 mass murders.
Right.
And that is that the story of Cain and Abel. I think it's Bruce Walkie says that because everybody's trying to figure out, well, what's the phenomenon that's going on?
Why are they doing this?
Well, we have these mass murders, and they seem to be contagious now, right? We're seeing the contagion.
A lot of imitation.
And the mimetic nature of them, right? And so and everybody's sort of searching for the real reason why this is happening, and I think. Bruce Walkie said, Cain failed in the field because he failed at the altar. And I think that's really, if you look at our culture, that's really one of the areas that we have, where we failed. Why? Just big picture wise, there might be a lot of other contributing factors, but big picture wise, we fail in the field because we fail in the altar, and it all goes back to this desire thing, And we desire what our neighbor has, and
that's not even really attacked in churches much.
And no, it's not.
It's like you don't touch people's desire stuff
Right.
as long as it's not too messy and too flagrantly sinful.
Right. And
let them buy their 16 pickup truck.
And
let them alone.
Just to show you the contagious part of it, though. Look at what James does with this. Why are there fights and why is there conflict among us?
Right.
Right. Well, because you desire, and you can't get it. So what? You kill. And I'm just amazed at how fast he goes from desire to murder.
Yeah.
I mean, in a flash.
Right.
And so that just shows you the whole.
But that killing starts, as Jesus says, in the heart, right? That desire to. And really, what again, Girard's helpful for, but it's really just written in the text. If you look at it. It's not that we desire the objects. It's that we desire the being of our neighbor. And those objects or statuses that they have or we perceive them have are like little tokens of their being that they just something about that guy. If I could just have that sense of peace or status or whatever that guy just imbues. If I could just get that. That's the unconscious script being run in the desire. It's like, and I just want to be him, but they don't say that. We always justify it as, no, there's no way I'd want to be like him. He's a loser,
Yeah, I don't just want what they have. I want to be them.
Because
we desire, they are.
Because we desire the infinite being of God. And so we can't get it, so we go after the creation, right?
Yeah.
We go after the creatures.
If you think about this, Adam and Eve wanted to be like God. Yeah, and so if you can follow that pattern all the way through the Bible. Especially through Genesis. It's just there.
Right.
I mean, it's just.
It starts with the eating thing, right?
Yeah.
The Forbach says what? Man is what he eats.
Yeah,
You are what you eat, right?
Yeah.
And I think that has, again, another little kernel of truth that we would be remiss to overlook.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the earliest forms of this scapegoat mechanism that we see in archaeological records across the world, they come in similar patterns, like cannibalism. You know, ritual cannibalism is a ubiquitous feature of the earliest, communities that we find of human presence. Why? That's, we talk about Christianity like it's so outdated. What other thing, other than the story of Christianity, gives us any clue as to why humans found the need to ritually cannibalize people? Obviously, there's different reasons and there's things, but the underlying thing is the desire for the being of the person they're cannibalizing. They would ritually, they've even shown chimpanzees ritually chewing on the alpha or something after they're dead. Or, there's a sense in which you're partaking in that other together. Sure. And that can happen through it.
You're becoming what they are, and you're also, you're also triumphing over them.
Right.
This is why warriors would, cut out the liver of their enemy and eat it.
Right. Right.
And
this is something we see pale shadows of it, vestiges of it, even in recent times. In I think the 60s, there was a movie, it's a recent movie, but it's about the killings of communists in Indonesia that took place in the 60s. People accused of communism or people who just were in the wrong ethnic group of the community at the time. And they had these military-style killing squads that would just kill people left and right. And the Indonesian government at the time, a movie called Act of Killing portrays this in a really visceral way. But it shows, they go and meet the killers, they're now old, and they ask them, they said, we had to drink the blood of our victims or we'd go crazy. What? Where does that come from, right? This 1960s story they're talking about, they're saying, we had to drink the blood of our victims or we'd lose our mind. What? What's going on? There's something weird about humans that we haven't even scratched the surface with. And I don't think Girard's theory, mimetic theory, is just the beginning of something that needs to be fully understood or tried to. Because there's these patterns. And I like to point to, the vestiges of this scapegoat mechanism in its mob form showing up in even America, 1920s. The story of an African-American man paraded in a mock king ceremony before being tortured in the public on a big massive stand above everybody else, paraded as a king. And I have to wonder, what's going through the minds of the people, participating in that mob the Sunday before, when they're in the pews and they're hearing maybe if they're lucky they're hearing a reading of the gospel about Jesus being, paraded as a mock king before being butchered in the public square. What was going on in those people's minds? How are they being blinded to the ugliness and the barbarity of what they were partaking, having sat in the pulpit and hearing their own sin they're about to commit, and that's supposed to be their God, and here's their monster that they're terrorizing, they're dehumanizing.
Well, and you can go, to places in West Africa, in Ghana, for instance, where you have these big Dutch Reformed churches, and beneath those churches are dungeons where slaves were captured and held and piled on top of each other. Right. In these dungeons to be sold into the slave market. Right. And the screams are being are drowned out by the choruses that are being sung above. Right. It's just it's incomprehensible.
But it's not just a picture of what is behind the decay.
I think
we're reaping the whirlwind, right?
Yeah.
Of this decay of a church that doesn't. What I don't understand is why doesn't the church? Why doesn't it put more teeth into its understanding and teachings of Jesus? You go to a church. And I understand that we're humans, and human beings are going to be blinded by the same groupthink, desires and scapegoating impulses. That's the point of the Bible, that they see the text and they still miss Jesus, right? Even his disciples hanging out with him for 3 years miss him, and they admit they did. So I understand it's tough, but how come you don't hear this kind of denunciation of this kind of collective violence more forthrightly from pulpits?
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is because it shows us how strong the myth is, and how hard it is to defeat. You know, the myth has been so persuasive and so effective. You know, this goes to why are so many evangelical Christians on the side of the warmongers?
Right, yeah.
You know, we berate Donald Trump for his adultery and fornication and his lifestyle.
Right.
But
the war is just fine.
But war is okay.
Yeah.
Or we, at least, you know, as long as it's not in my backyard.
Right.
You know, and we're talking about the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, most of who are innocent.
Right.
Women and children. And yet, that's okay. And so that just shows you how profoundly effective the myth to conceal violence actually is.
A lot of Christians don't see that God is condemning that kind of killing of innocents.
Right.
They don't see that.
Right.
I mean, they see it. If you ask them, does God want to kill innocents? No. But then there's always these 1,000 asterisks for exception clauses.
See,
what
what happens is, in their minds, we're not killing innocents. We're killing terrorists.
Right.
We're killing the enemy.
But a terrorist is anybody that's just in the wrong town.
Right. We're protecting our national security. It's the global war on terror, you know, and so that's okay. They deserve it.
Right.
You know, I mean, that just shows you how powerful and effective the myth is.
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, we have, and this is the one thing that Gerard is so good at is, you know, abolishing, destroying, demolishing that myth, and then once you see it, you can't unsee it. Right. You know, but most evangelical Christians, you know, are wholesale, you know, embracing the myth, not the Bible.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, you got one side of the church on the left, you know, who is more concerned, and I read this in an article a few days ago, you know, about wokeness, you know, being woke, you know, than they are about the war.
Right.
You know, so their whole metric, you know, is social justice. And if you don't understand social justice, you don't get it. But the war, it's not even on their on their radar.
Right. As long as you're saying the right language of apologizing about things, you can kill millions of people of color. In the Democratic Party, that's what they're saying, because they attacked Tulsi Gabbard when she denounced the wars.
Yes.
And they said, you know, Kamala Harris came out and her team and the media, oh, why are you with Assad? 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 Maybe to stop killing vulnerable people like you said you wanted to stop, right? Because their whole thing is, it's okay to kill as long as your language, your rhetoric is on the same groupthink wavelength as our ideology wants you to be. Right. So speak the language, and it has this way of hypnotizing you to the real flesh and blood victims and the carnage of the steady state. Yeah. You know, the steady, good old-fashioned state that happens where whoever's in charge. Right. You know?
And then on the right, you have the opposite thing. You know, they're not concerned about being woke; they're concerned about their wealth. Right. Right. And so the whole thing is economics, which is interesting because that was Marx's whole thing, right? Yeah. Marx saw all history from an economic perspective. Right. Right. Now this is a different kind of economics, but it's still perceiving everything through economics. Yeah. You know, it's just the antithesis of Marxism, but it's a twin. Right. It's really a twin.
It's a mimetic double.
It's a mimetic double. It's a confrontational double. Right. And so they're more concerned about wealth than warfare. Yeah. You know, it's all just about good old-fashioned economics. You know, look, there's money to be made here. You know, don't get in our way. Yeah. And who profits the most from this is the defense contractors. Right. You know, they're the ones that are profiting from the forever wars, from the perpetual wars. You know, I mean, think about this. 18 years and counting in Afghanistan. 18 years. The longest war in American history. The second longest war, you know what the second longest war was?
What's that?
It was the 15-year War of the Philippines.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay?
Wow.
You know, with MacArthur.
Right, yeah.
You know, that was our first attempt at colonialism.
Yeah.
You know, and a 15-year war in the Philippines, and now an 18-year war in Afghanistan, and they're still counting. And look at again the whole Girardian thing. Look at how the mob comes after Trump when he just says, "Yeah, I think we'll pull the troops out of Syria or out of Afghanistan." Right. The whole mob and all the machinery just turns at him and wants to what? They want to sacrifice him.
Yeah, the man is literally saying, I mean, he's not saying this, but this is the reality. He's saying, I want to stop killing people of color. And the mob, that's social justice, that's supposed to represent people of color, is wanting to destroy them for it. And they did the same thing in Syria, too. Oh, he's in league with Assad. He's in league with Russia because he wants peace with Assad.
Right.
But what about the persecuted minorities that you see, the Yazidis and these different religious communities?
Sure.
I thought these people are supposed to be on the side of the minority, the little guy.
Yeah.
And they don't care. And it's not them. We all have a share in this, this game. That's the point of sin.
We all have
it's a
skin
systemic
in this game.
thing.
Yeah.
But I think that the church, the reason why the social justice movement is so contagious is because the church is asleep at the wheel about talking about the ways of peace. I'm reading here in Luke, just when you were saying that about the war and how long we've been at the war, I'm looking here at the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 19. Jesus is going into Israel, and he says, and as he came near and saw the city, he wept over it and said, if you had known on this day, even you, the things that lead to peace, but now they have been hidden from your eyes. So what are the ways of peace? What are the things of peace?
Right.
What is he talking about?
Yeah.
What is he talking? The things of peace. So this is an allusion to what's coming in 70 AD, right? When the Romans come and sack the city, right? But he's saying, if you had only known the things of peace, what are the ways of peace? What are the things of peace that he's talking about?
Yeah. Well, I think, if you're asking me the question, is that a rhetorical question?
Both.
Yeah,
it's
both.
Okay,
it's both.
Anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for Jesus, for the Bible, for all of Scripture, he's talking about shalom.
Yeah.
Which is, it's human flourishing. It's the good life. It's the common good. It's,
which is a political thing. Right?
Yeah. Oh,
this is political right here. This is a political sentence.
Yeah. My goodness. It's.
This is a political sentence here.
Look, it's
not slightly political.
No, I was going to say
100%
this is completely political. And this is the whole thing. I think we don't understand that the Bible, that the kingdom of God is political. That Jesus is political. These are the politics of Jesus.
Right.
He is the ascended king, right? When he sat down on the right hand of God, the throne of God.
Right.
Okay? He's enthroned, which means he's ruling and he's reigning. And so that whole project of the last days has been inaugurated. It's started. The kingdom is already here. It's present with us, right? Yeah. It's not fully realized yet, but it's been inaugurated.
Right.
And so, this is what, Jesus has come, the Prince of Peace, the King of Peace, right? He has come into the world, and he's inaugurated that whole project.
Right.
And if only you would have known,
Right. But the ways of peace that he's talking about, it says right up above here, I'm just looking, it says, verse 39, Luke 19, and some of the Pharisees from the crowd said to him, "Teacher, admonish your disciples." And in answer, he said, "I tell you, if they should fall silent, the stones would cry out." And I looked into that. It was a reference to Habakkuk chapter 2, where the prophet Habakkuk is, quoting God, condemning the wicked king of his time. This is actually right before the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem then. So here Jesus is saying this. He's quoting Habakkuk, condemning a wicked king, and it's going to be sacked by Rome. And that's the allusion to that. And you see that pattern is happening again. Habakkuk 2 says the stones will cry out, "Woe to you who founds his city on bloodshed." This is a reference to the foundation stone sacrifices right here.
Right.
I am convinced of that.
Yeah.
He's talking about not that the Pharisees were literally laying children in the stones, but that the logic of the way they believed they were to conduct business in a civic political sense was built on the lie that violence and might makes right is acceptable when necessary, that it's a means of achieving an end that is glorious in God's sight. The idea that, that's what happens with Rome is they didn't know the ways of peace. They reciprocated the violence. They said, "You're going to take us out? Well, we're going to be zealots."
Right.
And they get mimetically sacked down.
From the blood of righteous Abel.
Right.
All the way, you have killed the prophets.
Right.
From the blood of Abel, okay, which we talked about Cain and Abel, right? All the way to Zechariah.
And then was it Hebrews that says his blood speaks a better word than Abel's blood, which means the shalom, the end of reciprocal violence. It is a non-violence message. How come that's not taught? What I just am fascinated by is it's popping off the page here, and I'm not expecting everybody to get on board with everything I'm suggesting about it, but this is totally political. The ways of peace mean stop reciprocating violence. It has something to do with do not resist evil with violence, turn the other cheek. Those are not Hallmark greetings. Those are social ordering principles of reality that Jesus is saying, this is the way the world will be now. This is the new world order.
Right.
Do not resist evil violently. Do not resist evil with force, you could translate it. That's a statement that has every importance to what's going on in the headlines today. Because we've abandoned that social ordering principle. We resist evil with violence all the time. We resist the evil of drugs.
We do more than that, I think. I think we do more than that, because I think we resist even the threat of evil with violence.
Right.
It's not like we even resist evil with violence. We resist the threat of evil, the potential threat of evil with violence.
Right.
And that's what the whole the whole schematic, if you will, of interventionism is, is that it's not even the violence itself or the act of violence against you that you're resisting. It's the threat, the potential threat of that violence. That's interventionist.
Right. It's preemptive violence.
Yeah, preemptive violence.
But isn't that preemptive violence at the heart of almost virtually all of our laws domestically too?
Yeah, well, yes.
Right? Because that's where I tie the anti-war thing of Christianity with the
war on drugs.
The war on drugs, right? Yeah. It's if I let you do a drug, I have to preemptively stop you from doing that drug, because if you do that drug, you may be more likely to be violent. You may drive a car. I don't know if you're going to stay in the house. You might get in the car and just zip off down the road and hit somebody. So I'm going to preemptively initiate violence to stop hypothetical future violence if you are allowed to work out your salvation on your own.
It's an interventionist policy, to be sure. Yeah.
And that's the logic behind almost every crime law we have, and the ones that are trying to be proposed now, like speech laws, right? Preemptively, I can't let you speak on this campus. You're not allowed to speak on this campus because the things you say, well, the left would say, denies people's existence. You don't give them a space of comfort and safety for them to be able to be existing, and therefore it's an act of violence. And then if they try to be more intelligible for the rest of us, they'll say, well, if we let you speak, you're going to trigger some crazy person to do violence because they don't like, you say that if you say something about sexuality, right? You might trigger someone to do something hateful to people that don't fit in within the Christian sexual, morals that you're talking about, right? So they say we have to preemptively use violence against you by putting a law against your speech, or else, we're going to unleash profane violence. That's the scapegoat mechanism still intact.
Sure.
It's still there.
Yeah.
We have to scapegoat this person, because if his violation of the taboo is contagiously allowed to circulate, what will happen? It'll be a chaotic violence. Everybody will be saying hateful things and leading people to horrible, violent hate crimes. So we have to sacrifice you for the good of the many. It's better that Jordan Peterson is blocked out of the college campus than the whole nation perish and people are allowed to hear different ideas. See?
Yeah.
It's totally religious.
Yeah.
The state in its universities and political correctness is a totally religious enterprise. It's not like a religion. It's birthed in religion.
Yeah, yeah.
It is what it does.
Right.
And that's what we're battling in some sense as a part of the Christian community. Not that you're politically, okay, tear down the state. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about exposing the foundations of the logic that is at the heart of politics. Christianity is the end of that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's the inauguration of it, but it's not yet complete.
Right, right.
Here's God here. Woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion. How long must this go on? Will not your creditor suddenly arise? It goes on. Then it says, will they not wake up and make you tremble? Then you will become their prey because you have plundered many nations. The people who are left will plunder you. For you have shed human blood. You have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. Woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain, setting his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin. The stones of that wall will cry out, and the beams of the woodwork will echo it, saying, woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice. And here we have this little document I printed out, and I don't know, it just says by the editors, this little document that just references so many examples of ancient communities laying human beings alive or killing them and then putting them into the cornerstone laying ceremony of a new city, a new wall, a new temple, a new river bridge, a dam. You see it over and over and over again. There's your monomyth. Yeah. There's your dead body. There's your skeletons in the
skeletal remains in the foundations and cornerstones of these buildings. Yeah.
So there's our humanity has some skeletons in our closet. We don't want to talk about them.
Yeah, there's some skeletons in the closet.
Because what is the left project all about? That Rousseauian noble savage, that our origins is great and everything that went wrong was just Christianity and patriarchy and all these little institutions and marriage. We just got to free ourselves, go back to that undifferentiated noble savage mythology.
Well, here's the thing. So this is one of the things that Gerard says, I think, that is so profound, is that the one thing that separates a human being from an animal is sacrifice.
Right.
I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, so, one of the things that it means to be human in the way that we are, right, is sacrifice.
Yeah.
And that hasn't, now, Christ gave us the means for which to bring a halt to that, a screeching halt to it, So by being, the one for all sacrifice, for our sins. But apart from Christ, that cycle, that mimetic cycle that always ends up turning the Hobbesian war of all against all, to the war of all against one, that cycle is not, apart from Christ, that cycle is not broken. It still goes on today.
Right. And so what we see at these foundations sacrifices is that's like the ribbon cutting ceremony for politics. You go to ribbon cutting ceremony for business today. You cut the little, mayor cuts the ribbon, and there's your bakery. Well, the ribbon cutting ceremony of governments is foundation. Laying a child screaming. One story had a woman that she was one of the wives of the king, had to be entombed into the walls of the city, but she had a nursing baby. So they left a hole big enough for her to nurse the baby until he was weaned, and then they entombed her into the walls alive.
Right. So these people, these skeletal remains, we find many of them were entombed into these architectural structures alive.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's what Jesus is alluding to this. He's calling out our skeletons in the closet. But what I like about this, as this prophecy that he quotes from Habakkuk 2, is that, right after it says, woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire? For the nations exhaust themselves for nothing. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. That's where that's from. And I thought about that and I thought, well, Jesus actually predicted that, and then it actually is happening right in front of our eyes. So he says, if they're silent, if these guys praising Hosanna to me, saying I'm the king, if they're silent, the stones will cry out. That actually happened.
Yeah.
Because the crowd was silent.
Right.
They turned on him, even his disciples. And in their silence, the stones, the hidden victims of our history, have been crying out ever since.
Yeah.
And that's why the knowledge of the Lord is filling the earth as the waters fill the ocean. That's happening in our lifetime right now. We're seeing that literally. You don't have to talk about woo-woo. You can talk about actual history. Because ever since that, wherever the story of Jesus' wrongful persecution has gone, victims are crying out for justice. One of the first things that primitive societies let go of when they encounter the gospel is their sacrificial practices. They let go of that. That doesn't mean this happens overnight. Obviously, the church was imbued with sacrificial logic and still working it out. They were burning witches. But they were burning witches in a way that was still a kind of a pale imitation of the ancient form of sacrifice.
But when something like that happens, witch trials and so forth, you have a metric by which to measure, right, your departure from Scripture, right? So you know now that you can at least look back and say, okay, this was not a necessary consequence of Christianity. It's a departure from Christianity.
Right. And it's still, and the thing about Christianity that makes it different from ideology is that it assumes free will as the foundation. This is a choice, right? You have the idea is you must choose to find and to obey the ways of peace that have been modeled for you by your role model, Jesus, as your role model for desire, or you're going to role model the desires of every neighbor you have. Every neighbor you have will lead you into this cannibalistic one-upmanship of cannibalizing each other's desires and never finding any satisfaction from it. And then that snowballs into the violence that we see with shootings and wars and all these destructions of our communities. So that's what happens when we follow the way of sacrifice of the old order. But it's the reason why it's creating more and more chaos is because it eats itself up in light of the gospel. Because you can't scapegoat as long as you are aware that you're scapegoating. And that's one of the things that politics is having a hard time containing the nastiness. It used to be the place where, okay, we put aside our differences, war by other means, politics, right? But now we're starting to see, wait a second, we can't scapegoat the politicians because they're actually doubles, right? Trump is a double of mostly of what Obama and Clinton did, functionally, on the wars and the perpetuation of debt, right? So we're starting to see the cat's out of the bag of the magic trick of the state, which is, again, kings originated as sacrifices, right? A king was somebody who forestalled his inevitable sacrifice, right? And that's why, ancient victims of scapegoating practices would be dressed up as kings and given favor and wine and women and feasts and then killed. Well, you think about that practice being delayed by trickery or, hey guys, let me tell you, hello my neighbor, hello my darling, I'm your king now, right? They find a way to stay alive. Hey, and I have special stock here. Because remember, the scapegoat's also sacred. And so that special stock breeds internally, and you create this line of stock that every now and then, when things go crazy, you chop the king or the royal guys off, you see? And that was where we get, that was the intermediary state between the modern state that we have now and the ancient primitive religions that we came from. But it's all the same function, scapegoating. So, to me, what we're seeing with political correctness is it's a Christian imitation trying to reignite and still stoke the fires of sacrificial logic, but using the concern for victims, the vestige of victims, to try to trump Christianity's defense of victims. You're not doing it strong enough. You're too much, because the idea is that Jesus' message of forgiveness of the oppressor and the oppressed is too much in league with the oppressor. It's not radical enough, right? And so that's why you have this victimism, this political correctness, social justice thing that's sweeping the West, which is this pathological obsession with guilt. Because you see the scapegoat mechanism unfurling faster and faster in front of our eyes, and it gives us guilt. And we want to offload that guilt. And that's why with the white people that are into this social justice liberalism, they see their religion as, they see their race as some kind of something that if I beat it up and sacrifice my whiteness, I become a savior. It's that process of the scapegoat right there in front of you. You sacrifice something as evil, and then it resurrects as a savior, which is the old mythology.
Yes, exactly.
That's what they're doing in real time. They're sacrificing.
So that the victim becomes a deity.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're sacrificing these white liberals that are pushing the social justice deconstruction ideology, wokeness. They're saying if I publicly flagellate my gender or my race, if I kill it and sacrifice it, then I become a savior in the resurrection of that.
Right.
I become the savior. And that's why they're loving this ideology, because it gives them some mechanism of feeling like they're paying tribute. They're giving a self-flagellation. But there is no forgiveness in their complex.
Right.
There is no reconciliation. If you say something bad in a politically correct way, what can you do to ever get back in good standing? If you apologize, they kill you more. You know? Yeah. What do you do to become right in right relationship with your neighbor? Without Jesus, they have nothing. They don't even pretend to say it. That's what they call that cancel culture. You're canceled. Cancel them off of TV. You know, they were saying the New York Times they had a big Twitter trend today. Thousands and thousands of hashtags saying cancel New York Times because the headline said something like Trump calls for unity against violence or racism or something like that. And they said that was not anti-Trump enough.
Right. So cancel them.
Yeah, so cancel them. You see, sacrifice them because they're not wanting to sacrifice our bad guy enough. You know?
Yeah, well, it's the French Revolution. You know, eventually, the guillotine falls on Robespierre. So it's you can chop off all the heads you want, but if that's your mechanism that you're going to employ as a solution, eventually it's going to come back and you're going to lose your own head. Off with the head.
And they believe the people who are attracted to this political correctness, they believe they're fighting the power, but they don't really realize how fully entrenched in the power system they are. You know?
Right.
I mean, Kamala Harris is, again, a perfect example of that. Not to pick on her. Obviously, she's just representative of a very popular way of thinking.
Sure.
But it's the idea that you can lock people up by thousands for marijuana.
Right.
But if you're virtue signaling about, the language of racism or something, that somehow atones for flesh and blood victims.
Right.
That's
and here's
not as
the
important.
thing. I think, all of this is set up around the idea, that, the state is a false soteriology, and this is what you're left with,
Soteriology is how you're saved.
How you're saved.
Yeah.
And so this is the one thing that both the right and the left agree on, right? The state is our salvation.
Right.
And so and that's why both have furthered the power of the state.
Right.
And and if you look at the state, it's mimicking all of the attributes of God.
Right.
So it's omniscient. It knows everything. Why? Because it's
surveilling
everything
you know.
Right?
It has power of life and death.
It has power of life and death. It requires the ultimate sacrifice.
With soldiers, they pay their blood so that you have your freedoms and you have the right to vote. How many times have you been told that blood, the soldier's blood has to be shed so that you can vote? And what is voting? A right that you do to perpetuate the existence of the state. So the state as a body must maintain itself through the shed sacrifice of soldiers.
Exactly.
That's
and so it's
that's 101
it's
sacrificial religion.
Yeah, and so it's a false soteriology, and much the same way that globalism is a false Catholicity. Which is we talk about the church as one holy Catholic, meaning universal church, you know. And globalism is, is a false Catholicity in the way that, the church is supposed to be Catholic, and the church is Catholic. And the thing, and the state can't figure out how to do both the local and the universal at the same time.
Yeah, that's the fight between nationalism and globalism.
It has to fight between one or the other.
Yeah.
One eats the other.
Right.
You see, and what it ends up doing is reversing it, so that the local has to feed the global.
Right.
Right. And so the global ends up consuming everything, consumes the local. But the church, right? I mean, this is the one thing that, when I celebrate the Lord's Supper, right? I do that locally, but it's inhabited by the universal.
Right. Yeah.
You see,
universal.
And so the church, instituted by Christ, constituted by the Holy Spirit, right, is both at one and the same time local and universal. Right. And so globalism is a false Catholicity. Statism, right, is a false soteriology. And these are mimics of the reality.
And people have said, why don't you, I'm tough on the things I disagree with Trump about, but they say, well, why don't you hit him more too? But to me, this Trump movement of nationalism is like it's like a reunion tour for a 1970s rock band.
Yeah.
It's their final swan song. They've got big sellout theaters. They've got biggest stadiums you could ask for, but they're 85 years old.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a last swan song for nationalism, and it's going out with a big bang. But that's how I look, because I look at Trump and I see him as the kind of a caricature of the Nietzsche style, which is the Ubermensch and I'm a winner, I'm a winner, I'm a winner, I'm cool, and he's playing with it. I know he's not, he's tongue in cheek. Yeah. But in a world where the only way you can have power is to feign victimhood, and he's saying, I'm a winner, I'll beat you and I'll take your oil. You're not supposed to say take the oil. You're supposed to do this stuff quietly, but you don't say take the oil. You're ruining all the decorum of the state that hides the ugly violence of the steady state of government. And he's tripping all over it, and he's bungling up their religious ritual, because that's the whole point of religious ritual. And that's what the state is. And there's a way of doing it, and if you violate that, you ruin the whole thing. Like, take for example his tweets, right? Yeah. He's always misspelling, and he's tweeting at 3 a.m. about some random, C-list actor or something he's feuding with, and you're like, what? What's happening here that's so making people go nuts? Yeah. They say over and over again, left and right will say, I like Trump or I hate him or whatever, but he doesn't act presidential. Right. What's that word mean? Yeah. Presidential. Right. It's sacredness. It's the office of the ritual of what you're supposed to perform. Right. And there's a way of being, and that was supposed to bind us together. And because he doesn't play that role, it's creating what Girard would call a crisis of undifferentiation. And here's how. You have two types of mediators of desire with Girard. You have an external mediator. That's someone that's got a place above you. You're not really going to reach into his territory and compete with him or her. So that could be a novel character that you read. It could be a chieftain. It could be a CEO of a big corporation, and you're at the bottom rung of the corporate ladder. That's an external mediator. You want to be like them. They're a role model, but you're never going to be in conflict with them in proximity. An internal mediator is someone that you have a chance at feeling like you could kind of get something on them. You could compete with them to some degree. What is Twitter with Trump? Other than the president becoming from an external mediator, untouchable, to he's misspelling every word like you do, or I would, or whatever. He's typing in all caps. He's petty. He's tweeting at 3 a.m. on the toilet probably, and that ruins the external mediation of the sacred role of the president. Now he's an internal mediator. You kind of feel like, hey, he might retweet me, and I'm just cussing at him, and he'll just retweet. So you feel like you're closer to be able to grab a hold of him. Yeah. And that drives them nuts, right? Sure. Because now they feel like they can get him.
He goes from being one of them to one of us.
Right.
And that drives them crazy.
And they want to, and the whole point of the religion of the state is the belief that there's a special class of people
that can rule you
And it's not a game show host
Right.
who sells steaks and wines
Right.
and golf clubs
Right.
and
No.
casinos.
No.
That's not.
No.
That's a character on TV.
Sure.
That
Sure.
on the hierarchy, that's a lower character on the hierarchy. He can be a billionaire all day, but he does not touch the sacred role of the state. The sacred role of the state is for people who have the decorum, the politically correct language, always the smooth tone. It's a hypnotic thing.
Yeah.
It really keeps. We're missing the politically correct language is the symbol that encloses the violence.
Yeah.
And if you break the politically correct language like Trump does almost
Sure.
every day,
Sure.
you see the violence for what it is, and it repulses you.
Right.
See, it repulses you.
Yeah.
The shooting doesn't feel as comforted. You don't get to have the comfort from the shootings
Yeah.
because he's not saying, "Hello, sirs. I want to tell you all how much." He doesn't do it. That's not his thing. He's not that guy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't comfort. It doesn't create that little catharsis of,
Sure.
well, we'll get those killers together.
Right.
You get this feeling of profaneness of a guy that talks just like you or somebody else
Yeah.
that you know at the gym.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I think in many ways, he has destroyed the myth that they're trying to protect, and that's what's driving them crazy. And in the same way that they have actually destroyed what we might call true, by their political correctness, they have destroyed what we might call true statecraft.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So their political correctness has ruined statecraft, and he's the symptom of that.
Right. Right.
So he's what happens when they are successful. When the state is successful by political correctness and destroying statecraft, Trump is the symptom.
Right. Right.
And
Statecraft meaning the finesse, right?
Yeah,
The way you
yeah.
do it in a way that hides the violence.
well,
Is it-
in one sense, yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, so in other words, statecraft is an art.
Right.
Okay, and in its own right, in the proper context, statecraft is something necessary. Okay, for governments to function well,
Right.
and for
So it's like a Shakespearean play, and he's showing up like a pro
nations
wrestler.
to relate to one another.
Yeah.
So and what they have done, I think, what the political correct crowd has done, is that they have usurped true statecraft,
Right.
and they're making a mockery of it,
Right.
and then Trump is kind of like the mirror there, he's mirroring what happens back to them when they're successful.
Right. Right. Yeah, I see that.
And so it's driving them crazy.
Right. So where does this all go? You're someone that spends your life teaching the gospel in the communities that are at the heart of all these topics that we're talking about. It's still at the epicenter of all world affairs and where things are going. You're in the heart of that, but you've got your life here in America. So you're seeing both of these, daily working out of these big topics that we're talking about. So where does this all go, though? I mean, obviously, I guess, in the battle between globalism and nationalism, whether Trump is reelected or whatever, I think globalism is going to have the edge on that. And I think it's because of Christianity. I think it's because of Christianity's concern for the victims. And globalism uses the language of concern for victims wherever it goes. And so however more it infects communities, it gets you to think about how your dominant community has oppressed or hurt or marginalized people to get where you're at. And that has a way of inverting the power structures of whatever community globalism goes. It's imitating that Christian inversion. It's doing it in a bad way in many times,
right.
but it's still Christian spreading. Christianity's still spreading because of this globalism, So where does this head? I mean,
Yeah.
what do you think? Do you think Christianity is going to have a diminished role? I guess as a religion, but maybe not as an aesthetic. Maybe it dies in the mainstream sense as a religion, but it's reborn and more of a rooted ethical and aesthetic impact on things. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that we have to realize is that, it's hard for any of us to see where this goes. Globalism and nationalism, I think in one sense, globalism, just from a purely economic sense, has been receding and retreating to some degree because of the nature of it. So, globalism is really built on material things.
Mm-hmm.
So, and material things are reproduced, and you can imitate the way that they're reproduced. All you have to do is take the model and reproduce it.
Right.
So you can set up manufacturing. So what China does, what Japan does, what Taiwan does is they just imitated Western manufacturing, and you can pretty much do that anywhere at any time.
Right.
But it's all with things made of atoms,
Mm-hmm.
material things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what that's done is that has stifled ingenuity and development. The only place that has thrived has been the cyber world, the world of technology. That's the only place that's really growing. That's the only place that's really different. Cars are pretty much the same cars that when I was a kid.
Yeah.
We used to watch the Jetsons. People were flying in cars. We're nowhere near that. In fact, airplanes now, they're not more technological than they were when I was a kid. They're the same planes.
Right.
in fact, they're worse.
Yeah.
If you look at the, if you
We're
look
gonna
at
have supersonic jets at one point.
when you get on an airplane now, you feel like you're getting on an old Greyhound bus. So so technology has stalled in every field except, right? Anything made with atoms, technology is stalled. It's going nowhere.
Right.
Right. So what you're seeing is that the reason why globalism is retreating is because everything that is made of atoms has been regulated and taxed to such a degree that it has stopped ingenuity.
Right. Yeah.
The only place that hasn't been taxed and regulated is the cyber world. You see, and so that's why that has been growing and growing and growing. But that's coming to an end now, right? So you look at all the big, you look at Silicon Valley, you look at Google, you look at Facebook, you look at all these different big tech, organizations, which are they can't be repeated.
Right.
Right. It's zero. It's what it's called 0 to 1.
Right.
Right. So there's only one Facebook, and everyone else is a loser.
Right. Yeah.
It's not about competition. Nobody wants competition in business. You want to exterminate the competition. Facebook did that. Google did that.
Right.
There's no competition. Come on, Yahoo. Come on. So there's no place to go.
Yeah.
And so we're retreating back to our nation states, as it were, and we're becoming more tribal in the process.
But do you think it'll
more
still?
sectarian.
Do you think it'll become more decentralized and localized and regionalized and balkanized?
Well, this is what the unknown factor is. So
Right.
so the question is, Trump is a stopgap,
Right.
as it were. And he doesn't. It's not like he's doing this with full awareness of what what the stakes are, what's going on.
He's just manifesting
his instinct,
the forces
right.
outside of his control.
Right. Now his instincts, I think, are largely pretty good with foreign policy and things like this. Okay, with the economy, but no one around him, is able to take and make which, if you want to say, a Trump doctrine.
Right.
And tell us what all that really looks like and what the long-range implications of a Trump doctrine would look like. But I think so. What's happening is a stopgap. So the question is what's going to happen, afterwards. It's like when Japan was thinking about attacking America, and all the Japanese generals and a war cabinet were meeting, and they were looking at the feasibility of attacking Pearl Harbor.
Right.
And they concluded this. They concluded, yeah, we can attack Pearl Harbor, and we can do it successfully. And then the three words echoed. I don't know how many words it is in Japanese, but in English they translate the three words. But then what?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're at here.
Then what? Yeah.
But then what? What's happened? What's going to happen after Trump?
Right.
You know, are we going to continue? Is the world going to continue to retreat back to its nation states, or are the globalists going to come back and be sort of?
Or will it be
afterwards?
decentralized states? That's what I'm curious.
So here's my
about.
metric.
The city states, will
Right.
they come back?
Well, right.
That's
right.
a third thing that still
And-
has a viable
yes.
future,
Right,
hopefully.
right.
Because
Now-
it gives a patchwork of
Well,
various
sure.
communities.
We hope it goes more towards a localist kind of,
Yeah.
you know, way, but we don't know. But you know, but here's my metric in the meantime. You know, so there's the then what,
Right.
but then there's the what in the meantime. Who's going to kill less people? Who's going to kill? Who's in the 2020 election? The result of that, whoever's in power, right? You know, they want our vote, and my metric for my vote is this: who's going to kill fewer people?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's going to abort fewer babies, and who's going to attack
Less countries.
less countries and
Right.
kill less people?
Right.
That's my metric.
Right. That makes sense. But that's the Christian logic, is that you should try to avert sacrifice
Right.
as much as possible.
Exactly.
And so
Right. And we've got to get Christians to see that.
I've tried to explain to people that I'll take someone that has the most vulgar language all day if
Absolutely.
they're killing less people and locking less people up.
Absolutely.
Flesh and blood physical violence is always worse than
Then
words.
vulgarity.
You know, the
Vulgarity, yes.
words is like the way I say it. It's like they believe sticks and stones can break foreigner bones, but politically incorrect words forever hurt me. That's the logic
Yeah,
of the Democratic
right.
and the leftist
Yeah.
thing, is words are everything. And so
Right.
if you use the right words, you can be like Obama and obliterate millions of poor people in Libya and Syria and all these places, but you're cool and you're collected and you have the right decorum, so therefore you're allowed to sacrifice. So Christians need to be in that conversation.
Right.
We need to hold the Trump administration account when he says, I like my police to slam my perps, their heads into the door when they're getting in. I want to throw them in hard. That's sacrificial language, right? He's trying to dehumanize the other. We don't know what they were arrested for. Was it stealing food at a restaurant? You're going to slam someone's head? Come on. So that's sacrificial language, and the church has to be challenging that on the right and on the left.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where I think the only way we'll have any hope of making our little communities a little more beautiful.
Amen.
We're very good.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thanks.